Hello and welcome to episode 14 of the Tune In podcast with Sarah and Harry. We really do apologise for missing last week. There were many scheduling issues and also we've just started uni again, so it's a bit of a hectic mess right now. But we do have an idea of times to record now and that kind of thing, so we can probably say quite safely that we will have episodes up like most Sundays now. Of course, we will actually let you know if anything changes in the meantime, which we didn't do last week. Again, we apologise for that. But regardless, we will get into this week's episode on the theme of
weather. So any song title with weather-related words in it. And then, as usual, we have a question from someone who would like to remain anonymous, so I'm not going to say their name, but we still appreciate a question all the same. So thank you very much for that. And also, we again, like every week, we have what we've been listening to this week added onto the end. So without further ado, I think we should just get straight into it with Harry's list.
Yes, so I decided to... I really tried to go with a different weather theme for each song that I picked. And I came very close to doing so. Although, unfortunately, one of my suggestions was turned down by Sarah. So, if you think the song Under Cover of Darkness constitutes weather, then please do let me know. Because I think it does with, cloud cover or darkness, two, technically speaking, types of weather. So, I think it does.
I'm going to interject. My reason. I have never, dismissed any of Harry's song choices before. Neither has he dismissed mine. However, I don't think it's specific enough to weather. You can be under a cover of anything. And darkness isn't weather. Darkness is just when you turn off lights. That was my logic. I could see where you were coming from, and I could see sort of where it was. I just thought it wasn't specific enough to weather, and it didn't have anything to do with the weather in the song, even slightly hinting at it. So I'm really sorry, Harry. I think he's a bit bitter, but I just really didn't think it was clear enough relating to weather.
Okay, I admitted it was very tenuous in the first place. I tried, and yeah, it's the first dismissed suggestion we've had on this podcast, I think. But unfortunately, yeah, so therefore I couldn't quite get a different weather theme for each of my songs, but I have still got 4, so I'm all right with that. My first song is actually, thankfully, a positive weather association, although considering we live in Manchester, that's probably not going to happen very often over the next little while. And it is the song Sunshine by David Guetta and Avicii. It's obviously a collaboration between two of the most high-profile producers of the modern era that surprisingly has gone almost completely under the radar. I don't think many people know about it that much. So the song was released on David Guetta's Nothing But The Beat Ultimate Edition in 2011, with a CD1 containing mostly pop EDM bangers, so things like Where Them Girls At or Little Bad Girl, the songs which made it big in the charts. And then CD2 features his more instrumental house, progressive house side, so with songs like The Alphabeat and this, obviously in a collaboration with the late great Avicii. Sunshine is progressive house, which is a genre which dates back to the 90s and fuses elements from things like techno, Eurodance, and various global house styles. So essentially it's a more melodic take on the house genre, and it's probably my favourite EDM subgenre. The song combines Guetta's pop-sensitive tones with Avicii's pretty much unparalleled ability in terms of the EDM world to create incredible synth melodies and electronic chord progressions, and it just creates a lovely sound. And I can imagine it playing, literally when the sun shines through after rain has just hit a certain location. I also remember actually when my football team, Man City, won the League Cup in March, they played this song during the trophy lift, which, made it all the better, because I was like, oh my word, they're playing Sunshine, what a great song, what a great choice. And then Corona hit, and then obviously it all went down the drain. But it was also nominated for a Grammy Award for Best Dance Recording in 2012, although it lost to Skrillex's Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites. And I'm not going to lie, it's better than Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites. But, you know, Grammys are the Grammys. And, yeah, that's my first pick.
It's okay. It's, to me, I was listening to it and I got a little bit bored. I was like, it's kind of doing the same things. I'm going to disagree with you. I definitely think that Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites, I really like that for some reason. I'm a Skrillex person and I never thought I would be, but I really like it. I think it just has more to it and it has more like shocking and contrasting things in it than this. Like this kind of just goes with what you would expect, whereas Scary Monsters has like the I don't know, typical Skrillex sort of like people shouting at it and like just like things that really contrast with the music and you wouldn't expect. Having said that, this is still fine.
Honestly, I'm pretty certain that's the category that Sarah's filed most of the EDM songs that I've sent to her in. It's just fine. Like, there's nothing.
It's fine.
It's fine. It does the job. And I'm like, right, okay, well, this is going to work, isn't it?
But yeah, I do have a question, and I thought this was kind of an interesting question. Obviously, it's on David Guetta's album, and it's not on any of Avicii's albums, is it?
No.
It's just...
No.
Okay. So... my question then is, do you think it fits David Guetta's music more, like his sort of discography, or Avicii's stuff more? And if it's sort of a mixture of both, then like what percentages of both, you know, that kind of thing?
It's a mixture of both, I think, but I would very, very much label it towards Avicii. No question of it. I can think of many like of the progressive house songs that he produced during this time as being not similar to this, but it fits in with what his sound normally is. And obviously, like, that's not mean to say that Guetta is averse to doing progressive house stuff, because that was what he built his early career on. But I think I would put this more with Avicii than I would with Guetta by a long way. And also, he has like a watermark kind of thing in his earlier stuff of a G sharp to an A bass note riff kind of thing, which is present in this song. So it kind of gives... I love it when electronic musicians, they have this like very, very specific watermark. I don't think many people pick up on it, and if they do, well, if you guys do, then obviously please let me know.
That's really interesting. So it's like the watermark then that you mentioned, sort of like watermark type thing, sort of like putting their like like when an artist signs a painting, for example, so you know it's their painting. Is it kind of
a little bit? It's like, you know, when like you have the producer shout out at the start of some songs,
okay.
or like there's like that kind of thing. Like obviously there are some producers who literally say the name of the producer during like at the start of the song or whatever, which I don't mind personally.
Yeah.
I think it's quite cool.
Most prolific example I can think of is probably Red One, because that's like a lot of the beginning is a lot of like pop songs. Yeah.
Or
Okay.
J.R. Rotem, I think he does that with Jason Derulo's earlier stuff. Like it's or
oh
that's
my god,
the
yes.
producer.
Okay, yeah.
But like Avicii's is more like, it's not him saying obviously, you know, Avicii, like that kind of thing. It's more just like his own, or not melody per se, but like his own little thing just added in. And I personally find that really cool. It adds a personal touch. So that is my first song. More EDM is to come later, but we're going to deviate to rap. And finally, after 14 episodes, I get to talk about Run the Jewels. I've been waiting for an opportunity to talk about them for absolutely ages. And finally, I've brought it up with their song Walking in the Snow, which was released in this year, actually, on RTJ4, their latest album, which I believe I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I absolutely love this album and I cannot recommend it enough. And it features during its heavily politically charged middle section. For those who are Philistines to rap, RTJ is a rap duo of LP and Killer Mike, with LP producing almost every single Run the Jewels track as well. And, well, the production here is understated yet villainous at exactly the same time, I think, which kind of sets it up for the vitriol and the not hate, so to speak, but certainly the criticism of society and how it works that is to follow in the verses. So LP's verse is mostly on how people are enslaved in society and how some Christians are kind of hypocritical and that they disrespect those of a certain colour or heritage, despite the Bible telling them to respect all walks of life. And it kind of hits home at the end of the verse as well, and it's just a bit of a, oh, okay, fair enough. And then Killer Mike comes in with probably the best verse on the entire album, which discusses police brutality and also the enslavement of people on the lower rungs of society. And if you hear it, you think maybe it was written in the aftermath of the the George Floyd murder, obviously back in May, but it was actually done in November 2019. And all it goes to show, really, is that that murder is despicably so one of many. And it's horrible to think that, but it's sadly true. The hook is provided by Gangsta Boo of 3 6 Mafia fame, and it's mostly a chance for Run the Jewels to basically delve into more political matters, and they do it pretty well, if I may say so myself.
The amount you mentioned it on the podcast, I didn't want to like it, but I did. I was really annoyed, to be honest, but I just thought it was a really good way of dealing with such a heavy but necessary topic, if that makes sense. I was just wondering what the title and like the lyrics in the hook, if there's like a hidden message, or like what's your interpretation of it?
It could be to do with like, I mean, it's like, this verse is particularly cold. I won't repeat what the actual hook is because we try and keep it family friendly on this podcast as much as possible.
Yeah.
But it's like, maybe it's to do with like, the coldness of society, or the ruthless, cold-hearted nature that some people in the higher powers, maybe education or politics, that they have. And obviously snow is very much associated with being cold. But I know that's obviously the most basic thing I'll probably ever say on this podcast.
Snow is cold.
It is the most basic thing I'll ever say on this podcast, but it does also tie in. It's true. It's like, it's the fact that like, you can tie it in with this cold-hearted nature of being like this ruthless anger almost. Maybe cold in terms of the flows as well and the verses, because my word, they're cold. And that's in a good way. That's in a good way. That's not like saying, this verse is flames. I mean, it is, obviously, but it's cold in the way that they deliver it. It's very icy.
Yeah.
Especially Killer Mike. So, I mean, that's my interpretation. But I'm probably very, very wrong.
Unless they've said anything, I don't think there's a right and wrong way. I think it's, obviously, like most things, up for interpretation. But I got a similar kind of message from that, especially in the way that she says it as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's definitely very much implied that it's like, this is cold, like how everything operates right now. But at the same time, it's like you can very easily think of it in different ways. And I haven't read on like any, the two rappers actually commenting on the song itself, or certainly the chorus of the song, or the hook rather. But there you go. I finally got my obligatory mention of Run the Jewels out the way. I'm sure they'll crop up at some point later down the line. But there you go. There's my first one. My third song, is actually two musicians or groups who I've never discussed on this podcast before. So there you go. And it's the song My Name is Thunder by the Bloody Beetroots and Jet. You may have heard of Jet because they were the ones who did the song Are You Gonna Be My Girl? Which is obviously very high profile, very well known. But they actually split up in 2012, and this is the first song that they did after reforming, I believe in either 2016 or 2017, when this song was released. There's a rock version and electronic version of My Name is Thunder, as it is obviously an electronic rock crossover, but I'm going with the electronic version because I think it's much more, it brings much more aggression and, hard-hitting, thumping bass and that kind of thing than the rock version does, which I think was what they were trying to go for much more, whereas I don't think it comes out all that well in the rock version. In case you don't know who the Bloody Beetroots are as well, he's an Italian producer of the name Sir Bob Cornelius Rifo. Might be another stage name, but I'm not sure. And he explained that he wanted a rock voice for this particular song akin to Nick Kester, who's the lead singer of Jet, before he decided in the end to contact Kester himself, and it turned out that he only lived 2 hours away from Rifo in Italy, so it actually worked out quite well. Kester then got the rest of the band involved, and those two songs came from it, so the rock version and the electronic version, as they both had different approaches to how the song should sound. But in my opinion, the electronic one is straight fire, and I absolutely love it. It'd certainly be something I would absolutely love to hear at a festival and create a mosh pit in, but I'm pretty certain, I can probably tell already, that it wasn't the case the other way around.
So, I just...
This can only go well.
just to fit my sort of style and what I listen to, I much preferred the rock version of it. However, it's not to say I didn't like this version, but I would disagree with you when you said this one has more aggression. I do agree that in the ways that you described that, getting that more aggression, like with the heavy bass and things, yeah, it does have that, but I think it does have that level of aggression, but I think the rock version also has the same level, but just does it in a different way.
Maybe. I think like it's more like, when I listen to it personally, I think it's got a heavier drum beat, for example, which I think also contributes. And then there's just so much more like screamy soundscapes and screamy vocals as well that kind of tie in to make it more of a hit. That's what I was thinking with it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agree with you. I think it just has I don't think it's more aggressive. I think it's just a different kind of aggression. It's more of an in-your-face, like, can't even think of what the word is, but...
Brash.
Yeah, brash. That's a perfect word. Do you think two versions was necessary? Or do you think they could have maybe done a bit of a fusion and done maybe a different bridge, for example, or like verses and choruses being more contrasting within the same song?
I think it was necessary. Because I think, again, it was like they had two separate approaches to the song. And the Bloody Beetroots, like, he's known for really, really hard-hitting electronic anthems. Like, if anyone came in from like an outsider's perspective on EDM, it wouldn't be something that they would want to listen to straight away. Put it that way, because it's definitely very hard-hitting and like can be a bit overbearing or cumbersome at sometimes. With that in mind, I think they wanted to try and do the two separate songs to try and give their separate influences and separate styles and mesh them together, which I think they do really well on both of them. But I think it comes through more in the electronic version than the rock version because it combines the two much better, because there's a lot less of an electronic influence in the rock version. So I think it was definitely worthwhile doing the two. I don't know which one. I think because it was put onto the Bloody Beetroots' album, I think it makes sense that the highlight one, or the highlighted one, was the electronic one. But also nice to create the rock version as like a by the way, here's a different take on the same song.
And I guess it appeals to a wider audience as well, because then you have the electronic fans and then you also have the rock fans as well. Yeah,
exactly. It's like you get the best of both worlds, I think. And I've heard a few electronic rock crossovers, and normally they do a decent job, but I think this is one of the best of the lot. So that is my third song. My fourth is probably the most well-known one on my list. And it's the song Singing in the Rain, but not the original version or the Gene Kelly version, which made it so popular, but the remix, if you could call it that, or the reworking, I think is the right word, by Mint Royale. I guess maybe this should have featured last week because obviously it's kind of a cover in a way, but I'm picking it now because, yeah, I am. The original was written by Arthur Freed and Nasir Herb Brown, although it's unclear exactly when, as although it was published in 1929, some reports state that it was actually done as early as 1927. So Mint Royale, aka Nick Claxton, released his own take on the song in 2005, although it was initially solely to be a part of the ad campaign for the new, at the time, Volkswagen Golf GTI. It had to actually be cleared in order to be released as a single, as it was tied down exclusively to the ad, although by the time that happened, the ad was off the TV. Despite the fact that it was really popular amongst the people who had seen the advert, once it got taken off, it was a case of out of sight, out of mind, and it didn't actually chart as well as it might have done. However, it was then used by the Britain's Got Talent 2008 winner George Sampson, who was aged just 14 at the time, in his breakdance routine, and its popularity subsequently skyrocketed, and it reached number 1 in June 2008, of course 3 years after the song was released. So it features the original instrumental line, but obviously sped up and made into a more electronica or techno style. Or you never actually hear the phrase "singing in the rain" throughout the song. This is another one of those songs that I kind of grew up with a lot. Like I listened to it for pretty much like going on 10 years, a lot more than that. For me, it's just a nice listen. Even with the the electronica influence, I think it's a really cool take on the song, and it keeps some of the original atmosphere, but kind of makes it more modern.
I would definitely agree with you there. again, I pretty certain I heard this advert and was like, I really like this song, and then I went years forgetting what it was, and then you put it on this list, and I was like, is this what I think it is? And I found out, I was like, oh my god, this is the remix I've been looking for years.
Well, there you go. We've actually proved a help on this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I really like it. The reason I really like it is basically for the reason that you said. It retains a lot of the original sound and even the original sort of laid-back, happy-go-lucky kind of feel to it, but adds more, obviously, new, modern sounds to it, but definitely retains that old-school feel, which I really, really like.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it is literally like, it has that relaxed feel. Like, it's not intense per se. It's just like something that you could dance to, obviously, much like the original. But it's also something that fits much more with the modern audience.
Yeah, I think this wouldn't have worked if it had just been completely new sounds and completely changed it up, sort of like a classic remix would do. Which sort of leads into my question. Do you have an example of like an old song or an older song that's been remixed where it doesn't really work as well as this?
Okay, so I think I have one that's come to the top of my head. And it's actually a song I brought up on the podcast before, Hey Boy, Hey Girl by the Chemical Brothers. There have been a couple of remixes done of it. I think I mentioned it on the podcast. One by actually David Guetta bringing back in. The problem with that is that it kind of makes it too much. The point of the original song is meant to just be like, it's danceable, but it's not, again, overbearing. It's not like brashing in your face and like really aggressive. It's meant to just be like a kind of laid back atmosphere. Whereas this new version, the modern version, it just basically creates this really tub thumping bass and kick drums and stuff like that. And you're like, I don't really think that this works very well. So that would probably be, again, it's not my best example, and I'm certain that there's one that I am completely forgetting. In fact, I'm almost 175,000% certain that there is definitely one that I'm forgetting, because there's one that's been like, if it comes back to me, if for whatever reason it magically pops into my head throughout the rest of the podcast, I will let you guys know. And if it does, of course, it will feature, like all of the other songs that we mentioned, in our Spotify playlist that we create every single week. So you can form your own opinions on whatever we discuss and see whether you like our weather choices and just the general stuff that we bring up as well throughout the podcast. It's probably going to annoy me for the rest of the day trying to think of what that song is.
Sorry.
It's not your fault, but I should know, because I know there is one somewhere. I just can't think of what it is for the life of me. Okay, so this is actually an interjection post-production and whilst I'm editing the podcast, because I have actually remembered which song it is that I was trying to think of. And it's actually another David Guetta song, the cover that he did of the Cher or Nancy Sinatra classic, Bang Bang, My Baby Shot Me Down, simply entitled Shot Me Down, which features Skylar Grey. It's got a completely unnecessary EDM drop to it, and it just doesn't work with the song at all. And also, whilst I'm here, the one that I'm thinking of, the cover of Hey Boy, Hey Girl, is actually by Dimitri Vegas and Like Mike and Nicky Romero, and not by David Guetta. Although, check out both versions anyway and form your own opinion on it. But that's just a little interjection that I thought I'd give post-production, that the song I was actually trying to think of was Shot Me Down by David Guetta featuring Skylar Grey. But that is my fourth song. My fifth and my replacement for Under Cover of Darkness. I've gone with the song Thunder. So obviously not My Name is Thunder, just Thunder, by The Prodigy. It was released in 2009 as part of The Prodigy's comeback album Invaders Must Die, which is one of the first albums I really listened to intensely as a kid. And it contains the aggressive Prodigy sound from their earlier projects, but with a more modern twist to it. Obviously modern being at that time, because obviously that was 11 years ago now. However, it was only Liam Howlett, out of the three members of the band, who has a writing credit on the song, as of course he produced it, as he does with pretty much every other Prodigy track. It's essentially a reworking of some lyrics in the song Ethiopian Peace Song, or Rasta Peace Song, by Trevor Joe, or the Brentford All-Stars. A lot of ambiguity for some reason in this song, I don't know why. But Maxim, one of the MCs of The Prodigy, gave a CD to Howlett with this song on. which had a load of like reggae tracks on it. So therefore it has that reggae influence. The kind of reggae feel is added to by the presence of the vocalist Brother Culture, who provides the vocals to the song. And so it's essentially just basically taking the lyrics. I think it's like 25 seconds into the original song, or like 25 to 40 seconds. I think that's the timestamps that I remember. But as soon as I hear this song, like, I'm transported back to that summer of 2009 when I listened to it quite a lot. So it has a lot of personal memories attached to it. So I was only too happy to include it as like a late replacement, if you like, for the original track, which I had in mind.
Yeah, well, along with my strange music phases, I really liked The Prodigy at some point. It was sort of the same time as Skrillex. I know they're very different sounds, but yeah, I mean, I haven't heard this song specifically, but I really liked it. As you were saying before, my main point was going to be like it sounds like The Prodigy, but it also sounds like new The Prodigy compared to a lot of their older stuff. My question, which you sort of touched on, but I thought you maybe could go into a little bit more detail, is the sort of significance and the meaning of the lyrics that are used and whether they've been recontextualized by the different music.
I think they just liked the idea of being like, you know, this kind of aggressive thunder breaking walls and window panes, and being like, you know, they hear that and it's like, that's just typical Prodigy anger and, again, aggression. So I think they kind of wanted to rework it to fit it, or Howlett wants to rework it to fit it with a different style. I can't remember the original context of this original song, so the Ethiopian Peace song, off the top of my head, but he hears this really sudden and abrupt, is that the right word? I don't know, there's a better word out there somewhere, but it doesn't spring to mind. But abrupt, like, message of like, oh, here's some thunder, but it doesn't, it's going to break walls and window panes. And then all of a sudden this thunder sound effects in the chorus, and, you know, people being scared and all that kind of stuff. It's very Prodigy. You could tell that it's the Prodigy, and it's got that modern spin. So I think they just wanted to take those lyrics and make it their own, almost. But yeah, so that's just my surmising of the song, and with that, it concludes my personal list. And now we switch things up to move to Sarah's very theme-inspired list.
So I originally wasn't gonna do like this sort much of a theme to my list. However, all the songs I picked, it was completely by accident, have something to do with rain or water or some kind of rainy environment, weather, which is kind of apt for Manchester. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
But it was completely unintentional. But you know what? I have a theme now, and I'm going to stick with it. So
there you go.
Yeah. So my first song on the list is actually someone that my mum introduced me to when I was quite young, and still loves to this day. And it's a song called The Flood by Katie Melua on her album The House, which was released in 2010. She's a British Georgian singer, so she was born in Georgia and then moved to Belfast and then to London. So she's been to a lot of different places. And this song generally got favourable reviews and critiques. It was generally very well written song, what they seemed to get from it was elegant, very genuine, quite adventurous, but quite subtle in the way that it was done. However, it only peaked in the UK at number 35 on the charts. But what I found quite interesting was it got to number 7 in Belgium and number 3 in Norway. I don't know if she has a very specific fan base in these countries, but I thought that was quite interesting. The song itself is obviously very metaphorical in terms of the lyrics, and I'm not entirely sure on the meaning that she was going for, so I'm not really going to comment on that. However, the structure of it seems to be very water orientated. It sort of builds to this chorus section where it's very like she's singing the highest notes of the song basically, and it's sort of all the verses build to this point and it dies back down again and then builds up again and then dies back down and then goes to this bridge section which is a complete contrast. It's a lot faster, a lot like what I'd imagine to be sort of a a flurrying, fast river kind of thing in this flood, and then builds again for this final chorus. That's obviously, again, just my interpretation of the song, but that's why I really like it, because it's very sort of metaphorical and very, very adventurous, but quite subtly done and very sort of elegantly done.
I quite enjoyed it. It was not like anything that made it particularly. I didn't think it was particularly like amazing per se, but like it was good. I enjoyed it to an extent. I did like the opening riff. That was one thing I really did like, especially with the kind of sudden and abrupt minor shift. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's quite cool. Mm-hmm. And then obviously, as you say, it has a completely different bridge section. So can songs with this type of duality, do you think, work in other contexts, and why do you think it works here?
I mean, it very much depends on the subject matter. If someone's just doing it for the sake of it, I don't think it works, and I think it just is very jarring. But in this context, I think it works brilliantly, just because of the general structure of the song, as I mentioned before, in terms of like all the water kind of connotations and like following this journey of this flood happening. So I think that tends to be why it works. And also it still sounds like her sound, even though it completely changes tempo and sort of the style of it. It still has her sort of sound to it, so it doesn't sound too jarring. And also touching on the bit you mentioned before with the opening riff or motif, whatever you want to call it, it's really interesting. And it also has, I picked up on the dynamic motif bit to it as well, as it like swells sort of again like water, like a swelling kind of water thing, which I thought was really, really interesting. And the ascending and then descending melody line was also kind of like flowing water. I don't know if this is all intentional. This is just what I got from it as well. It's my interpretation.
Yeah. I can see that. I think it was a bit jarring the first time I heard it, because it was a bit like, oh, okay, that was kind of a bit unexpected. It felt like two separate songs, but I can see why it does make a little bit more sense once analysed a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I've had years to listen to it, so...
That's true.
So I think that's also the difference as well. Moving on to my second pick now, and this is just put in sort of a light comedic effect kind of thing. It's a piece called The Rainy Mountain, and it's from a game that I love, and it's a very, very sweet game. It's just called Pikuniku, and the music was written by Caleb Bowen. This game was released in 2019, and it involves the character called Pikuniku, who basically follows a quest to save the village from this really evil company that's taking their crops and giving them essentially free money. But then the free money ends up being useless because they just all have this money. And as we know, inflation and printing more money doesn't solve that problem. So then they go in and he saves them and helps get their crops back and things. But it's a very silly game. Like, it's not a serious game in the slightest. The way that the character Pikuniku walks is just it's so silly. He has like very, very long legs. It's kind of hard to explain, but you just have to play the game to see it. He just sort of fumbles around. And there's a lot of jokes and witty comments made by the other characters, which just make the game very entertaining. And I think this music reflects that silliness, with the sort of the staccato electronic punchy kind of sounds, and they're all sort of all over the place, which reflects the silly nature of it. And also the staccato, because this is about the rainy mountain, so the staccato notes also could reflect kind of the rain falling. But yeah, that's why I picked this piece.
It made me smile. It did make me smile. It's one of those ones. It was simple but effective, and I was smiling throughout listening to it. It does get a little bit repetitive, but I think that's because it just repeats like most music does in video games. So I can understand that. But it certainly, I rated the accordion usage as well.
Yes.
My question is like, what role does this fulfill in the game?
So I haven't played this game for a while, and I literally did it in one afternoon. Like, I just sat down and completed it, and I haven't touched it since. But from what I remember, it's sort of halfway through when he goes to, surprise, surprise, a rainy mountain. I think there's a bit when he's in the lake on the mountain. It's sort of basically just to create the atmosphere of a rainy mountain, but then also to create this sort of comedic effect to it. So I guess that sort of, it has that dual effect of trying to recreate the rain, and like being up high on a mountain, which I think it does really well with the staccato sort of falling things, and then also keep the same style of music, being quite silly, being quite funny, not serious in any way, and it does that really well with the sounds that it uses, and also the staccato notes, because that's sort of a theme that runs throughout the music. Moving on to my third choice, which I'll admit isn't my favourite song by this artist, but I love this artist and I wanted to bring them in, and I didn't see any other way of doing it. So it's a song called Rain, and it's by Ben Platt now. This was released last year. It was just a single, it wasn't on an album. And I think Ben Platt's probably most known for acting and theatre stuff, so obviously he was in Pitch Perfect, which I found out relatively recently when I rewatched it. And he also debuted Evan Hansen in Dear Evan Hansen, so he debuted that role. So he's sort of become synonymous as like, oh, that's Evan, instead of people going, oh, it's Ben Platt, people go, oh, it's Evan Hansen. Like, anyway, but I do think that his original music should not be overlooked because of this. His first album, Sing to Me Instead, was tended to be kind of folky, easy listening pop type acoustic stuff, but this tends to be more of a dancey kind of pop track, which is quite different to his original style. What I really like about this is also the music video, because it's very sort of, it's just Ben Platt essentially at night at a petrol station dancing around in the rain, but it's so understated, but the message of the song still comes across in his I mean, he's a great actor, so obviously in his like facial expressions and in the way that he moves. But the other reason I picked the song in general, apart from Platt's emotion and his voice, I love his voice, it's just a really fun and catchy song, and I love listening to it and dancing along to it and just like belting out in the kitchen. That's basically why I picked the song.
Yeah, I can see it's catchy and it's got a catchy atmosphere, but it doesn't really do anything for me at all. Like I'm really trying to like a lot of the stuff like this that Sarah Sensu, but I just can't sometimes, and it's all right. The song's okay. It like you say with most of my EDM stuff, it's fine. It does the job,
yeah.
And but it just doesn't really stand out at all. But I was wondering why you think the 1-5-6-4 chord progression that is used in this song is so popular.
It's a variation of the standard sort of chord progression for any pop song. I couldn't tell you why it's so popular, if I'm being totally honest, but there are so many songs. I've watched a video of someone who basically was like, did so many different songs using exactly the same chord progression, because even with the slight variation, you can still, the notes tend to fit in with the standard chord progression of 1-5-6-4 or 1-6-4-5. Even if it's in a minor key, you can change up the chords to 6-4-1-5 and just change the order of them. I don't know. I guess the most prolific song I can think of with that chord progression so sort of in your face is the song "Stand By Me," and then a lot of pop songs, more recent pop songs, have sort of used that exact same chord progression or the exact same sort of sound. And then I don't know. It's a very easy chord progression to write for. And a lot of melodies and stuff have already sort of been pre-written, and you can get a lot of inspiration from it. So I guess that might be one reason for it. But I don't know. Ben Platt doesn't normally do this, and I'm sort of upset with this song in that respect. As in, it's very poppy and appealing to a very poppy audience. But I do recommend his first album. I guess I put this song in just to plug this album. Sing to Me Instead, an amazing album. Highly recommend that more so than the song. But if you listen to this song and you like his voice and the emotion that he puts into every single thing he sings, even if it's just a pop song with classic pop song tropes like this, then go and listen to that album, because I think it incorporates a lot more imaginative and a lot more creative, and he's really tried to sort of change it up from being sort of a typical pop album. But so I do see your point, and I guess the reason that has become so popular is because, I don't know, maybe one person did it in before, for example with Stand By Me. I'm sure it was done way before that, and then people liking that, people taking inspiration from that, and then it's sort of branching out from there.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's a simple concept and it's very formulaic, but it works. That's not to say I don't like any song that does have this chord progression, because there are many songs that do work like that. And
Yeah.
it's just interesting as to why, they do decide on this chord progression as opposed to maybe trying something a little bit different. But I guess if he wants to make it formulaic, then he did a pretty decent job of it.
Yeah, that's the thing. He doesn't normally do that, so I was a bit annoyed. But I'm in love with his voice. His voice is exceptional. He has an incredible range and just puts so much emotion into whatever he sings. Like, he made me like this kind of song, which I probably wouldn't normally. So my fourth pick is another Panic at the Disco song, and I'm very sorry about that, but I haven't picked a song off this album yet, and I think this album is very different to their normal stuff. So I've picked the song Northern Downpour off the album Pretty Odd, which is sort of the weird second album they did, just trying out new sounds. So the song was written by former members Ryan Ross and John Walker. So John Walker was the bassist, and Ryan Ross was guitarist and backing, or second vocalist. He does have a few lines for himself now thinking about it. And it was actually the last single they had with the band, which is kind of sad, but they went their separate ways, and that's okay sometimes. So the lyrics are based on the band's touring cycle they just went on for their first album, their girlfriends, and sort of everything that was important to them and characterised the last few years of their lives that they just had. And the band themselves have characterised it as the most important and meaningful song on that album to them. The reception of the song was pretty positive, and a lot of... and I can definitely hear this, one of the reviewers compared it to the Beatles' A Day in the Life. Haven't heard the song per se, but I feel like this album has sort of experimental Beatles vibes to it, just a more modern take on it. And also, I thought that was kind of interesting parallel to make, because the mixing of the song was done at Abbey Road Studios. So I thought that was a kind of interesting parallel between them to make. I love it. I love the song because lyrically it's quite, with a lot of Panic songs, especially on this album, it's quite abstract and metaphorical and complicated, but musically it's quite simple in terms of it's quite stripped back, rather than using a lot of different instruments and a lot of different sounds and complex things. It's just quite simple, quite laid back, but lyrically it's quite an abstract concept, which is why I picked the song and why I really like it.
Yeah, I think that you basically summed up Panic at the Disco to a T.
Yeah.
It's this really weird lyrics and sometimes quite simple music, but this is, weirdly enough, the only Panic album that I haven't given a listen to yet, so I wasn't too familiar with this song. But I don't think it sounds like A Day in the Life at all. I think it sounds more like Hey Jude by the Beatles as well.
Yeah.
Especially with the Hey Moon, that kind of thing, like the drop in vocals. I don't think it sounds like A Day in the Life at all. I don't know where on earth that reporter's getting that thing from. I was wondering whether you prefer the more manic or more personal Panic at the Disco.
I had a feeling this question was coming, and I should have prepared an answer for this, but I haven't. But no, I do see, sorry, just going back to your previous point, I haven't heard A Day in the Life myself, so I can't compare it to that, but I do really see what you mean with Hey Jude, and just sort of a Beatles, that sort of era of Beatles sound in general. Yes. I think maybe that's what they were thinking about, but maybe they just compared it to the wrong song. I don't know entirely. It's really hard to compare their sound. So, I mean, going off, my favourite album by them is still Vices and Virtues, which I think does a sort of mixture of all of their sounds, if that makes sense. There's some poppy elements, there's some more experimental elements and quite quirky sounds, but they've still got their quintessential sort of emo sound like they did from their first album. So just comparing the two albums, Pretty Odd and A Fever You Can't Sweat Out. A Fever You Can't Sweat Out is definitely the sound that they wanted to create in the first place to sort of go along with the emo trends of the time, and I think they do suit that really well, but then a lot of their songs sound quite samey because of that, whereas Pretty Odd is definitely, they were experimenting, trying new sounds, trying different things, maybe trying a few drugs along the way. It's like, especially in the song 9 in the Afternoon, that is essentially about taking drugs and your eyes the size of the moon, that kind of thing.
We don't condone it on this podcast.
Well, no, we 100% don't. I really should have said that. We really don't condone it at all. Which might go along with the Beatles sound, because it's speculated, allegedly, a lot of their sounds tend to come from experimentations with drugs and things, which obviously we do not condone and is not cool. But I think I just prefer this sound because everything is so unique. It's inspired by the Beatles, definitely, but they definitely put their own stamp on it, their own mark on that. So I think I out of the two, I'd prefer this, but then I prefer when they sort of I prefer Vice and Virtues because they synthesized this sort of unique, very different sound into something that was more sort of listenable, if that makes sense, more sort of easy listening for a general audience. Moving on to my fifth song, which is a relatively new release, to be fair, so I haven't heard it as much as I've heard the other songs on this list, but it's a song, Match in the Rain, by, I don't think I've ever mentioned this singer before, Alec Benjamin, on his new EP that was released just this year called These Two Windows. I don't think I mentioned him before, but he's another artist that I really like. This song is about the person that you love leaving you behind, and then you're trying to do anything to get their love back, which I think that pain is sort of reflected in his vocals in particular. The music itself, again, is quite simple, with like just an electronic drum beat, some piano chords, and small electronic elements sort of added in the end, which isn't admittedly a particularly revolutionary concept and a particularly revolutionary backing, but it's just the way that he sings. He has a very unique voice. He is very understated, as I say maybe every week with everyone's voice that I like. However, he still gets that emotion across in the song, which is why I picked it.
Yeah, I don't like his voice at all. I think he sounds like Sleeping with Sirens' lead vocalist Kellen Quinn, but melted down and worse. It's kind of like sneery in a way, but not. I don't like sneery vocals, and yeah, I didn't gel with this song at all. I hate to say it, but I really didn't.
Okay.
But yeah, okay. But
Fine.
What's your opinion on this new trend kind of thing of this singy spoken mix of vocals that is used in this song and maybe more propagated by people like Taylor Swift and Ariana Grande? So, at the end when he's kind of singing, but there's also it's more spoken, it's more there are notes, but it's definitely more spoken.
Yeah, I mean, I quite like it, just because I can't think of any examples in any Taylor Swift or Ariana Grande songs where they've done it, but I think Alec Benjamin does it in a different way, which is why I like it, because I don't necessarily like it when they do it. It seems very forced, whereas with him it seems like, I don't know how good he is at rapping per se, but it gets a clearer message across while he's still sort of singing on maybe a few notes. So it's sort of his way of getting a full sentence across to people and getting the message of some of the songs across to people. If you think about, for example, do you mean something like Ariana Grande's Seven Rings?
Something like that, yeah.
She goes
yeah,
I see it, I like it, I want it, that kind of thing.
I hate that song so much.
You're welcome for that. It's just, I'm not going to talk about it, but
yeah,
I think obviously Alec Benjamin does it in a very different way of getting the message across, which might otherwise be constrained by rhyming structures or a certain amount of syllables in a line, for example. He's not bound by those constraints, so he can say what he's feeling and exactly how he's feeling it, sort of just like a word vomit of just what he wants to get across in a more eloquent way than just singing it.
Yeah, I can see that, but it's also just for me it just felt really jarring, and I'm not a massive fan of that kind of thing per se. Again, the song you mentioned earlier, Seven Rings, just I didn't want to ever think about that song ever again.
I didn't want to use that as an example, but it was the only thing I could think of.
It's fine.
I mean, I like it just because, it's just fun. I don't like it because of any kind of musical way, but yeah, I didn't want to use it as an example.
Yeah, it can work. I just didn't think it did in this song, and I think it's just a bit of a trend which I'm still coming round to. But it might take me a lot longer to get around to, because I just don't know if I can grow to like it that much.
That's totally fine. I mean, it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
So that's okay. And with that, we get to the end of my list and the end of our top 5 for the theme. Now we move on to the question, which was submitted by someone who wants to remain anonymous. So no name this week. I apologise, but still. Same level of appreciation for the question, so
as always.
Yes. as always. The question is, should singles be completely standalone or part of an album that is released?
Yeah, it's like something that I've thought about before, because it's certainly like interesting to see how singles have changed. Because when it was like back in the 60s, a lot of bands like the Beatles, for example, bringing them back up again, they would release songs that were specifically meant to be singles, so they weren't part of the album that was going to come out. They were specifically marketed as singles, and then the rest of the songs that weren't released as a single were put onto the album. So you kind of hear this the more commercial stuff, and then you hear the rest of the album, which might be a little bit different. But at the same time, like if you release a single nowadays from an album, it maybe gives a bit of an indication as to what the album might be like. So let's just take, for example, I don't know, When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go by Billie Eilish, just as a random example that came to the top of my head. The singles that were released, I think it was Bury a Friend and Bad Guy, or not about Bad Guy, but there was one other one, When the Party's Over. They kind of gave an indication of the moody pop that Eilish would do for that album. So I guess it is a sight into what that particular album might be like. So you can see both sides.
Yeah, I agree with what you said in terms of like it gives you an insight to what the album is going to be like, in terms of, especially that was a very good example, because they songs are very good representations of the types of stuff that she does. But in terms of sort of actually selling an album and making money, I think personally the single should be on the album, because then you have familiar tracks for people to then go and buy the album. Whereas if you had a complete album of completely new songs, obviously people are quite different, but it generally wouldn't appeal to someone because they're like, I don't know anything on this album, so why would I go out and buy it? Whereas like if they already know a couple of songs, it'll be like, oh, I'll go buy it and then listen to the rest of the songs. So it's a really good sort of marketing strategy for that album.
Yeah, I guess the other side that might be, again, playing devil's advocate, being like against that, is the idea of concept albums. If you're going to release a single from that, like, I do want to bring them up, but I know Sarah won't like me bringing them back up again, but The Streets. And A Grand Don't Come For Free is a concept album, but the singles that were released from that before the album was dropped, only one of them really tied into the actual story, with the other one being like just, it doesn't fit in with the overall narrative of the album. It's kind of like an interlude. So with concept albums especially, if you're going to release songs as singles from them, you have to be so careful which ones you do release, because again, it gives an indication of what the album's going to be like, but it also might have to be, if you're branding it as a concept album, you probably want to release something that's part of the story, so it gives you an indication of what the story's going to be about.
Yeah, a concept album I think is kind of a unique case in that respect, because Lady Gaga's album, her new album, was a concept album and has a couple of orchestral moments in it,
right?
At least, and I think obviously it would have been completely wrong to release those sort of 30-second orchestral moments as singles, and I think that is part of this sort of concept album, like of this Chromatica. I don't know the exact story behind it, so don't quote me on that, but she picked the songs that she knew were probably gonna sell the most. For example, her one with Ariana Grande, Rain On Me, which you might not like it, you might like it, whatever, but you can't deny that it's catchy and it's got a lot of people singing it, and then it's got a lot of people to buy the album and brought a lot of people towards her album and made her album release like so much more anticipated. Obviously she's quite a high profile artist, so probably would have been highly anticipated anyway, but I think releasing that single as this sort of marketing strategy in a way enticed more people to go and buy the album, or at least go and stream it and listen to it.
Yeah, I think, like, again, it's also like with the single side, there are loads of people who just release singles. I know like a lot of electronic artists do this, so they kind of just put singles out as opposed to maybe fully fledged EPs. They realize that that's the market now, but also if they were to create like an EP, it would be good to have like an indication of what that EP or album would have in store. Even if there are loads of different styles explored on it, there's still, an eclecticism that shines through. Yeah,
going off the point and sort of summarising, I guess, I think the albums should have released singles on them, so they sort of encapsulate the sound and the style of the album, so people know what they're sort of getting into before they buy it, because then they're more likely to buy it. But that doesn't mean that all singles released should then appear on albums. like if they want to try something new, or I don't know, they just like the song standing alone and not really being on an album, doesn't really fit onto an album anywhere, then that should stay as a single. I still think there should be singles on albums, but that doesn't mean every single they have to release has to go on an album, if that makes sense.
Or that an album even has to have a single pre-release as well. Of course, the trend of surprise albums nowadays, with people like Taylor Swift and Eminem doing that, you kind of get that extra element.
I think a surprise album only really works if you're already an established artist. Because I imagine if your first album was just a surprise album, then I don't think anyone would really listen to it.
No one would. Like, it would just be like kind of, oh, okay, right. This came out of nowhere. You have to be like either at the top of your game or just someone who is well known to do that, or both. But I think that I personally think that like you have to release the singles correctly. And that doesn't mean to say like you have to put every single single onto an album that you make. Like, for example, like again, one final one just before round up. The one with the Black Eyed Peas did their not the latest album, but the one before that, Masters of the Sun. They didn't put on the song Street Living, which is an excellent song. I definitely recommend it. But it fitted in perfectly with the hip hop, political hip hop vibe of the album. Yet for some reason, it just wasn't released. But it gave people an indication of what they were returning to and what they were trying to do at the same time. So I thought that was quite cool, but I was a bit disappointed that it wasn't put onto the album in the final product.
Yeah, I think that summarises quite nicely. So I think we should leave it there. If you have any opinions on the topic, please let us know. Drop us a message, put a comment on the post. Any way of contacting us is absolutely fine. And if you have any other questions for us, please also let us know by... Again, all of those means are absolutely fine. Just anyway, even just telling us in person if you see us, or...
Well, that probably won't happen very soon.
No, exactly.
That probably won't happen very soon.
I said that and then realised. But like, if you're on a Zoom call with us on like a class or something, just drop us a message on the chat.
Yeah.
I mean, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. Everyone, lecturers might be a bit confused, but just find any way. Anyway, like private message or whatever, or message us on the page, and we will do our best to answer them.
So then we'll move on to the final section, as always, and it's what we've been listening to this week. So I'm going to start us off because I think I have some very interesting picks this week, very, very varied. So I think actually Harry mentioned this. I can't remember if it's on the podcast or maybe he cut it out or he said it afterwards to me on the same call. But Pendulum have released some new stuff. So I finally. I think this was a couple of weeks ago, you might have mentioned this to me, but I finally gave it a listen, and I listened to, I think they've got 2 at the moment, and I can't remember what one of them is, but I listened to the song Driver. It just took me back. Like, it just has the Pendulum sound to it. It does sound kind of different, but at the same time, it's like, this is Pendulum, like, this is just Pendulum, like, this is so good. It felt the same. I was like, Pendulum is back. It was great. So give that a listen if you like Pendulum. The next one I picked is actually a classical piece. As like we said before, we started university, and one of the courses we're actually both doing is a composition portfolio. So I've done a bit of listening for that, just sort of listening to a wide range of stuff to try and find the style that I like. And I found something super, super interesting. And it's a piece called Trio Titanic by Henry Gorecki. I'm very sorry if I said that wrong. It's hard to explain. It's not like experimental 20th century stuff. It still has like a tone, like a tonal center, and has like, it's quite harmonic. It's not really that dissonant in any way. I really like the second and third movements. They're just really fun, really lively and upbeat. I haven't done a proper in-depth harmonic analysis, but it's if you listen to the chords, they're very, very interesting chords and very interesting sort of tonally in general, which is why I picked that, and it sort of stood out to me as one of the things that I listened to. My final pick is, it's spooky season, coming into Halloween, and one of my favourite sort of seasonal films in general is A Nightmare Before Christmas. I know it's sort of Christmassy as well, but I thought I'd pick a more Halloween type song on this album rather than a Christmassy one. So I picked the Oogie Boogie song. The whole soundtrack score was composed by Danny Elfman. Obviously it's Tim Burton, so you wouldn't expect anything less. It's just very Halloweeny, and I just love singing along to it and feeling spooky. So that's why I picked that one, and that rounds off my list.
Yeah, I mentioned Driver a couple of weeks back. I pretty much begged Sarah to go and listen to it, so I'm very, very glad that So like I said, the other song that they released is Nothing for Free, which is a bit more EDM pop like. But yeah, Driver is a banger. So my list is interesting. So my first song is the song Stand Up Tall by Dizzy Rascal. It's kind of got a UK garage vibe. So it's released back in 2005, I think, or 2004 on his album Showtime, which is a fantastic album. And it's just such a hype-up song. And I discovered this after listening to the song for the first time, but it was actually on the first FIFA Street soundtrack, which I can definitely see why it would feature, because it has that kind of grimy, hyperactive, uplifting vibe to it. My second one, I finally got around to listening to the new releases by the band Nothing But Thieves. I don't know why I didn't get around to listening to them a lot earlier, but their song Unperson I've really grown to like. I think it has a Bring Me the Horizon element in that it combines the rock and electronic feel to the song. You can definitely tell that it's a Nothing But Thieves song. Like it has those elements, but I also love the kind of combination of the rock and electronic soundscape to it that again has that Bring Me the Horizon vibe. But I wouldn't say it's a knockoff by any means. I just think it has a relatively similar sound. And my final two, I want to give a little bit of a special mention to an album that I listened to recently, because it was Logic's final album before retirement. I hated his previous two albums realistically, and I was begging that he was going to bring out something fantastic for his final project. I gave it my absolute full attention, and it delivered so much. It's such a good album. It's something groundbreaking. It's just a fantastic record, and I'm so glad because it really did. I was just listening to it and thinking, yeah, this is great. The two best songs from it are Celebration and Heard 'Em Say. Celebration is very much like, wordplay Logic, really clever bars, really clever lyrics. And Heard 'Em Say is his more personal side, delving into his struggles with his mental health and things like that. And they combine, the two songs, I think, sum up the Logic on this album. Either the really clever wordplay, the clever bars, the funny punchlines Logic, or the really introspective and deep and personal Logic. That was what was missing on a few of his previous efforts, but thankfully he pulled it off for his final one. So I was very, very glad that he did, because I was very close to being no longer a Logic fan, but he just about redeemed himself. Well, I say just about. He very much redeemed himself. So that is my list, and with that comes the end of this week's episode. Again, we do apologise for missing last week. It's just some things happened, as they always seem to do with us. But hopefully we now have a schedule in place that should mean that it actually becomes a bit simpler to set up recordings and do that kind of thing, and obviously get it out in time. But in any case, thank you very much for listening to this weather edition of the Tune In podcast, and until next time,
we'll see you then.